that. So over to you, Lucas.
Thank you so much, Dev, and thank you so much, everyone, for attending this rather like informal, I would say more like an overview style lecture about some of my work, some of the work that is related to my childhood fascination, which is astronomy, cosmic perspective. And since I did my PhD in environmental humanities, I was always thinking about how to connect astronomy and ecology. And basically, in the past couple of years, through my research, I've discovered, or kind of like for myself, realized that probably ecology, as we think about like environmental sustainability, for example, on Earth, is basically applied astronomy. It's an application of a certain perspective on the cosmic environment, on this particular part of the cosmos, which is the Earth, which is the planet Earth. So as I like to say, it's kind of the motto of the talk, there is no ecology without the cosmic perspective. And my background, to tell you a little bit more also as a kind of introduction to who I am, where I come from. I come from Slovakia originally, which is a small country in Eastern Europe. I spent a lot of time living in East Asia, particularly in Shanghai, and lately also in other cities in China, mostly Changsha in Hunan. And I'm trained as a philosopher, despite also having the PhD in environmental humanities. And as a philosopher, I mostly specialize or focus on three disciplines or areas of interest. That's emerging technologies, that's ecology, and that's astronomy. I collaborate with several institutions. Dev mentioned that some of these institutions can be thought of as somehow pushing the boundaries. And I guess like that's especially the case with an institution that's called Antikythera, which is part of the institute, which is called Berggruen Institute, which is based in California, but operates globally. And Antikythera is basically a think tank. It is not an academic organization, strictly speaking. We are academics by training, including our director, philosopher of technology, Benjamin Bratton. But most of our work is kind of para-academic in the sense that we, for example, try to create like spaces that are kind of like dissolving the silos that perhaps you were also Dev talking about in relation to different communities in Chiang Mai. That we don't work only interdisciplinary, but we really try to bring together, for example, sci-fi authors with policymakers, with scientists who work, for example, on new energy technologies, artificial intelligence. One of our closest collaborators is, for example, Google Research, and especially a team which is called Paradigms of Intelligence, which is run by one of the probably the most well-networked affiliate researchers, whose name is Blaise Aguera y Arcas. And he's also publishing a book with us soon. We have a publishing platform with MIT Press, and the book is going to be called What is Intelligence?, which is also a hat tip to the Erwin Schrödinger's 1940s book, What is Life? And we also run studios, we run salons, we often collaborate with academic institutions such as the aforementioned MIT, but also University of the Arts London. We also, since many people here are from China, we also have an office at Beida, at Peking University, and there's also some activity that we do there, like running salons, talking to philosophers of biology there, talking to Chinese sci-fi authors. One of the persons that is very close, to our operations is Stanley or Chen Qiufan, who's the author of the sci-fi book Waste-Tide, which is quite popular Chinese sci-fi book. And he's collaborating with us on how to think about sci-fi and as a forecasting tool, as a tool of, writing scenarios about near-term future. What is the expertise of a speculative writer, basically, in thinking about the future? And over the past couple of years, I've been also working with NYU Shanghai. NYU Shanghai is basically one of the campuses of NYU outside of the US. And I spent some time there as a postdoctoral researcher, and I'm still affiliated with their Center for AI and Culture. So sometimes I publish my work also with their affiliation. But since I'm from Slovakia, of course, I also try to maintain some connection to the Slovak institution. So I'm also at the Institute of Philosophy of the Slovak Academy of Sciences. So to me, that's an important base camp, also in a certain sense, to really work with philosophers proper in this academic setting of the Academy of Sciences. Just in case someone of you is going to be in Italy, in Venice, over the next couple of months, in Venice is now Architecture Biennale, and one of the events or exhibitions during the Biennale is also produced by us at the Antikythera. It's called The Next Earth, and it is at Palazzo Diedo, which is a gallery space which is owned by Nicholas Berggruen, who's also the founder of the Berggruen Institute. And so in case you want to also see another kind of, I would say, presentation of these thoughts, less about like, spoken language, more about visuals, videos, visualizations, computer models, have a look at The Next Earth at Palazzo Diedo in Venice. And so in 2019, I published a book which is called Introduction to Comparative Planetology. And this book is kind of deceptively named almost as a book from physics or astronomy, because comparative planetology, that's actually a subdiscipline of astronomy that talks about planets in terms of their similarities and differences. What are their atmospheres? What are their geologies? Is there water or no? Do they have any atmosphere at all? How far are they from the sun, etc.? So comparative planetology is, at the one hand, a physical science, but also to me, it's a philosophical discipline. Because you can think about comparing not just different planets, but you can also think, speculatively speaking, about different ways how to imagine our Earth. So we can compare basically different versions of our Earth, different scenarios of how the planet can evolve. And in this short book, I was kind of trying to lay some groundwork in terms of like how this philosophical discipline of comparative planetology can proceed. To me, it was a lot about how we think about geopolitics, about how the Earth is segmented into some territories according to some principles of sovereignty, and how that creates different ecological dynamics. Why, for example, we treat the problem of climate change as problem of cooperation between nations, when in fact, chemicals that are circulating in the atmosphere, CO2, it doesn't recognize any borders. It circulates freely. So there is a mismatch between the way how the armature, between the way how the institutions and infrastructures are divided and how they cooperate or don't cooperate, and the scale of the problem that they face. So the scale is the national, but the problem is planetary. And that's the mismatch that I was trying to point at in the book as well. But beyond that, you can think about comparative planetology in a certain sense as an idea that is closely related to other, I would say, scientific methods. George Gamow, who's the author of the term comparative planetology, he uses this analogy with anatomy. He says that this comparative planetology, as it may be called, will help us to understand the characteristics of our own planet, much in the same way as comparative anatomy gives biologists a better understanding of the human organism by comparing it with those of mosquitoes and elephants. So there is an implication, a simple implication, that only when you look at the possible space of what planets are, you can better understand what is this one particular version of the planet, which we call the Earth. So again, only in cosmic perspective, we can really understand ecology and sustainability. And when we talk about astronomy, we have to talk about optics. We have to talk about mirrors. Below on the screen, you see the mirrors of the James Webb Telescope, but there is also a citation by one of my favorite anthropologists of science. Her name is Lisa Messeri. And she talks about outer space as a kind of realm, and outer space research as a kind of science which mirrors cultural imagination, which creates analogies between the terrestrial and the extraterrestrial. So she talks about something, Lisa Messeri, she talks about something she calls gestures of cosmic relation. And this citation I actually tend to overuse quite a lot because I really adore it, since she says that astronomy does not stand apart from terrestrial pursuits, but rather deeply informs our understandings about Earth and our modes of being in the world. So the quest to find a planet like our own, as with human spaceflight, promises greater understanding of places elsewhere in the universe, but also provides a mirror for examining terrestrial relations. And this observation to me is actually also linked to, I would say, like technical infrastructure of astronomy, because astronomy would be impossible without mirrors. Yeah, you have telescopes, for example, and telescopes usually employ mirrors. You need lenses and you need mirrors in order to see something. And optics, by way of coincidence, it's been also something that's been a very like popular activity or popular scientific, I would say, pastime of many early modern Western philosophers. For example, René Descartes or Thomas Hobbes wrote significant volumes on the issues of bending and reflecting light. Baruch Spinoza was a lens grinder, which means that he was like polishing and grinding the lenses that were then used, for example, to magnify something. Yeah. So philosophers were for a long time fascinated by optics, by the interplay of light, by the ability to see something distant or something too small. And you can also think about the relation between philosophy and optics, which is to me also kind of a certain, like relation to astronomy that we can see here. That there's a certain connotation of like mirroring in this like reflective activity of philosophy, that we contemplate, we meditate. There's a certain reflection, yeah? There's a certain mirroring. And of course, that also brings us to Buddhist theory of knowledge. Like, how do you know something in this theoretical apparatus of Buddhism? Mahayana Buddhism, which I am more familiar with because I'm mostly situated in the context of East Asian countries as China, Japan. Mahayana Buddhism uses a lot of these metaphors of optical vision, yeah? That when you know something, you see something. And this kind of vision is actually some kind of like inner intellectual vision. It's some kind of contemplative practice. And so what is interesting about what is interesting here is also that this kind of seeing is not some kind of like mystical spiritual experience. It's actually rational. There is no distinction between philosophy and religion here. And for this reason, the activity of seeing something through some like introspection, through some inner vision, is actually a same kind of rational activity as observing something on the sky through the telescope, for example. And this is very important to me, that there is a certain, I would say, like a close proximity between science, philosophy, and some kind of religious tradition. If you look, for example, into Platform Sutra of the Sixth Patriarch, this is a short citation from there. Again, you see a metaphor of optics, a metaphor of mirror here, that the Buddha nature is a bright and pure mirror which is discovered within. So as you see, to me as a philosopher, very often, I look at metaphors, I look at analogies, and this is the way how I work, like through seeing similar tropes, similar metaphors across different areas of knowledge making, whether it's astronomy, Buddhism, or Western philosophy. This brings me also, when I talk about philosophical contemplation, this brings me also to this reflection that I want to spend a little bit more time talking about today, and that's search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI. Efforts in contemporary astronomy focused on finding traces of intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. And so this is how we get to the cosmic perspective proper now. As perhaps some of you know, SETI begins properly in 1950s, 1960s, mostly thanks to the pioneering work of Frank Drake, who was an astronomer that was using this radio telescope in Green Bank to listen to the radio signals coming from some of the sun-like stars nearby our solar system, and trying to decipher whether some of these radio signals hide some message by some intelligent form of life. He never discovered anything like that, But as I will tell you in the moment, he set the agenda for the SETI for the decades to come. But there is another important figure here, one that is like very popular, and that's Enrico Fermi and the Fermi Paradox. So have you ever heard about Fermi Paradox? Do you know what's Fermi Paradox? Like, can someone tell me what is? Perhaps James, what is Fermi Paradox? Do you know? No. Yeah, where is everyone? Like, that's the question which Enrico Fermi famously uttered during one of the lunches that he had at Los Alamos in 1950. So he was basically pondering like upon this like seemingly like unexplainable lack of any signals of extraterrestrial activity on Earth. Why no one visited us? But then the problem expands. It's not just about no traces of extraterrestrial intelligence on Earth. It's also about traces of extraterrestrial intelligence in our solar system or in our galaxy. That's actually the way how the question is usually posed, like, why, given the vastness of the universe, why, given the fact that the universe is so old, there is no trace of any other intelligent life around us except of humans? There are many solutions, of course. Some of them must be very familiar to the Chinese-speaking guests in the audience today, like Santi, the three-body problem, which popularized the dark forest theory, which was originally posed actually already in 1980s, but Liu Cixin really did a good job in kind of like making the dark forest theory one of the most popular explanations that we cannot see any traces of intelligent life in the universe because everyone is actively hiding because it is dangerous to let everyone know about your presence. Another solution that's quite popular is the zoo hypothesis, which is basically that the Earth is a zoo. And so there is like a do not interfere sort of commandment for any other intelligent life, so that those other forms of intelligence can see what happens when there is basically something like an intelligence in a petri dish. Like, imagine the Earth as a petri dish, as a laboratory for making of intelligence, basically. And the other forms of life, forms of intelligent life, are just observing what's happening on Earth. And if they would interfere, they would corrupt the experiment. So as good scientists, they are actually trying to do something that will how to say that? They try to act as good scientists in this way, I would say. Or they have just fun watching us. That's another way how to explain the lack of observable traces of extraterrestrial intelligence. But my favorite solution is another one. It's called sustainability solution to Fermi paradox. And it's been originally posed by two astrobiologists. One is Jacob Haag-Misra and the other Seth Bohm. It's quite recent still. It's been 15 years, I think, since this solution has been published. And they basically say that the conclusion that other extraterrestrial intelligence do not exist contains some implicit assumptions about the nature and pattern of extraterrestrial intelligence. They basically say that we imagine by default that extraterrestrial intelligence will be crazily advanced, that they will colonize galaxy, and so that it doesn't make sense that we cannot see any because we have this assumption that if they are there, there must be super developed. Yeah? But what if actually this is not true? What if actually exponential growth is unsustainable pattern for intelligent life? What if actually intelligence tends to be way more modest in terms of how it organizes its behavior, how it organizes its society, how it organizes its life on any planet? They basically say that the absence of any observation of extraterrestrial intelligence is explained by the possibility that growth is simply not sustainable development pattern for intelligent civilizations, that there is some kind of bending here at a certain point. And this kind of idea that intelligent life tends to evolve towards collapse, or it adapts and survives by adapting, is something that's been also proposed by other astrobiologists. For example, Michael Wong and Stuart Bartlett, they talk about burnout of civilizations. In the same way as you have burnout of an individual human being, you can have a burnout of a civilization. And these burnouts can be prevented only if you pass like a very narrow bottleneck for the development. That's something which is called the great filter. Some kind of bottleneck in the space of possible planetary histories, let's say. And these bottlenecks, these great filters, can have many forms. For example, they can be related to the energy consumption. They can be related to population, if you prefer to be Malthusian. Or it can be about some endogenous breakdown, like, for example, nuclear warfare. What is important, though, is like this abstract idea behind, that there is some topology, some kind of space of possible histories. And this is the moment when comparative planetology, I was talking about it at the beginning, as an actual physical science and also a philosophical exercise. And at this moment, comparative planetology becomes also a comparative planetology of history. You can look up and speculate about different historical development trajectories, basically. Ideally, one day in the future, when we can really observe other intelligent forms of life, we can have this kind of like historical, I would say, science on the really cosmic scale, where histories can be compared based on different, like, I would say, biological or technological settings of the other intelligent life, on other planets. But even though this is only hypothetical, the very fact that, we already have such developed understanding of like this space of possibilities, it hints at the fact that the search for intelligence already now gives us some space of examples, some space of like thought experiments for thinking about historical pathways also here on Earth. So in the same way as with the sustainability solution, we learn something about sustainability on Earth, not just sustainability of other civilizations, but about our own planetary community. This holds also for other aspects of SETI. I think that we learn something about history through thinking about astronomy. History and astronomy are actually very closely connected, because also every night you look at the sky, you are looking at the historical record, you are looking at the archive, because the light you see is not the light that's there at the moment. Is the light that was emitted by the star like thousands and thousands of years ago. So basically it's like a photography of the past that we see every night on the sky. The other important thing is that comparative planetology of history gives us some ecological parameters to play with. How to think about planetary habitability, how to think about these historical possibilities in a more grounded sense. There is a famous equation that I will spend a little bit of time explaining now. And this equation is actually formulated by Frank Drake, the person who was first listening to the potential radio messages by aliens. Frank Drake famously formulated this equation when he was preparing the first conference about search for extraterrestrial intelligence in 1960. And this equation is basically used to estimate the number of technologically advanced communities in the galaxy. So that's the main variable here, N. That's the number that we want to get. The number of actively communicating extraterrestrial planetary communities. And it's put into relationship with 7 other variables. The first variable is the star formation rate in the Milky Way. That's actually something we know very well. Because in our Milky Way, on average, there are 7 stars born every year. So every year there are 7 new stars. Then the second parameter is the parameter that talks about the number of planets. So what is the fraction of stars that actually have some planets orbiting around? It's becoming more and more certain that every star has some population of planets, so probably the value of this parameter is very close to 1, which means that every star has at least some planet. Other of these parameters are more, I would say, like related to the planets themselves. Like, is the planet habitable? Or is there actually life on that planet? Then, is there intelligent life on the planet? And finally, also, is there an intelligent life that has actually technological capacities for some interstellar communication? These are all important parameters in terms of estimating the number of radio communicating civilizations. But the most important parameter, and the one that I want to focus on now, is the parameter L. L simply stands for longevity. Longevity of, or lifetime, average lifetime of technological communities. And so that's the reason why I talk about long L, how to prolong this interval of L, how to think about longevity of technological communities. To me, this parameter L is something like an imaginary bridge between the science of outer space and the ecological concerns here on Earth, because it gears our attention to the fact that it is not enough to just find oneself on the habitable planet, because the habitability of planet has to be actively maintained, cultivated, preserved, so that the community of intelligent beings can continue to flourish. The L parameter ties together the previous parameters, also starting with habitability, because depending on what you think about life, what you think about intelligence, what you think about technology, what are your theories of life, what are your theories of intelligence, based on this you can get very different options on how the habitability of the given planet for intelligent life can be actually maintained. And that's also how to prolong this L parameter, how to meaningfully expand this L parameter. And conversely, the more you think about expanding this L parameter, the more you care about habitability that is influenced by some kind of long-term plannable processes that unfold on the scale of evolutionary time, as opposed to fast-paced, short-term contingencies that become practically unobservable in the perspective of deep past and deep future. So my thoughts on the L parameter will be published soon in the journal that we are doing with Antikythera at MIT Press, and hopefully also down the line in the book that's going to be out in spring or autumn 2027. So it's pretty much in the future, but soon this autumn there will be a version of this also available to read online. But these remarks that I was just mentioning in relation to the L parameter of the Drake equation, they bring me into this reflection on the technological evolution and the long timelines of the technological evolution. I just fast forward now to this question that James actually asked me. If advanced civilizations truly achieve sustainability, might their technology become indistinguishable from natural systems, universal ecology? Is it your question? Yes. Could this resolve the Fermi paradox that advanced civilizations don't disappear, but rather their technology becomes silent because it merges seamlessly with nature? And this question that you posed is actually exactly what I want to say. I think that the silence, the great silence, is really explainable by the fact that the technology evolves towards being indistinguishable from nature. So we can have a look at this a little bit more. There's a sci-fi author, Karl Schröder, who also says that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from nature. Not from magic, as for example Arthur C. Clarke says that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, but Schröder says that it is indistinguishable from nature. And the reason is actually hidden in the sustainability solution to Fermi paradox. Because it is kind of reasonable to assume that if sustainability solution holds, any viable community of extraterrestrial intelligence will tend to maintain its economy and its technology in some kind of close to zero growth or even degrowth kind of condition. So if I put it into less technical vocabulary, sustainability solution to Fermi paradox implies that the absence of any detectable extraterrestrial activity is caused by the fact that intelligent life in the universe either self-destroys before reaching the point when its activity can be observable by our instruments, or that it is too busy saving its own planetary environment to make any spectacular gestures towards the potential cosmic audience. There is another reason why I think so. The second reason is that if you look at the difference between biosignatures and technosignatures in contemporary search for life and search for intelligence in the universe, the problem is that at a certain point, the idea of life and the idea of intelligence and technology will begin to collide in a certain way. The concept of technosignatures is really problematic from the sustainability solution perspective, especially because technosignatures are almost exclusively in this kind of like usual way of thinking about SETI. They are usually imagined as these like big gestures, like Dyson spheres, like some powerful radio signals, like megastructures that you can see from the distance of several light years. But it's very improbable, given the sustainability solution, that something like this can be constructed. So our ideas about like what are the traces of intelligence are actually wrong in this sense. We are basing we based our assumptions about intelligence on biased assumptions about our own economies, about our own technology, about our own intelligence in this sense. And this idea of indistinguishability from nature is something that I think is not really strange to many human communities on Earth. Take this example from a bit different field than outer space, and that's the history of robotics. The first robot to be built in Japan was created in Osaka in the late 1920s. And this robot was designed and manufactured by a biologist Makoto Nishimura. The robot's name was in Japanese Gakuten Soku, or Xuetianzi in Mandarin Chinese, which means learning from the laws of nature. So the idea of this robot wasn't to be manual laborer. The idea of this robot was to do the most noble, the highest kind of like spiritual activity. It was a writing robot. It was a robot which was supposed to write and read spiritual texts. So there is a very different idea of robotics here, but also like this idea of, let's say, spiritual activity as something conducted by a robot is important from the perspective of, thinking about spiritual activity as something that is also a scientific activity in that sense that you are learning from nature, something important about how to conduct your own life, yeah? And so if technology can be the mediator of this process, this kind of technology is also something that in this process is trying to mimic the nature, is trying to be like nature, is trying to align with nature. So I think that there is really something important in this idea of learning from laws of nature, in how it navigates societies and economies, and also technological imaginaries towards alignment with planetary environment, and towards the continuation of these more than human metabolisms of the planet, rather than some kind of like overhauling this metabolism or modifying these metabolisms. Another example, I've been researching with my colleague from UCL Bartlett in London, Christopher Berman, is biocomputing. Together, we have launched a research report in a form of web page, which is called After Silicon, and this is a short teaser for this research report. So what is important about this research is that we're really interested into something like a new computational substrates. This notion of substrate is quite important also in my own philosophy. These substrates are, for example, DNA. DNA used to store information. It can be organoid computing. That means growing basically small brains that are then linked to silicon hardware in order to run, for example, advanced neural networks, or bioprogramming of organisms. So we are looking at these different ways how computation merges with biology to actually argue for a certain alignment in this understanding of life and computation. That basically, if you look at biological substrates like DNA, they actually work quite similar like Turing machines, like computers in many sense. And this is not just a metaphor. It seems that there is a template of computation in front of us, that computation was discovered first by biochemistry on the Earth before it was actually discovered by humans while, for example, writing about logic and mathematics or constructing electronic machines. And one concept that I take from this research on biocomputing, which is my personal kind of like take on the biocomputing research, is the idea of substrate agnostic processes or substrate agnostic ecologies. Often, in the context of biocomputing, people talk about substrate agnosticity, what they mean by that is that computation can be theoretically realized on multiple different substrates. And the question is just whether it is technologically feasible. And in the same way as computation is thought of as substrate agnostic, you can also think about ecologies as substrate agnostic. And I'm going to tell you now a very short I'm going now just like to read for a while a short paragraph from the book that I'm writing now, which is about substrate agnostic ecology, and particularly about this chapter is called SOR, which is an analogy to SOS, Save Our Souls. SOR means Save Our Robots. And this is my take on substrate agnostic ecology here, because the major consequence of thinking about ecology like in truly substrate agnostic terms is that technological agents are worth of the same kind of care as those agents deemed to be more natural in some folk metaphysical frameworks. And this immediately suggests an ethical depth in the making towards non-humans. Just consider how across the Earth, machines of different species take over duties of care related to human life, from domestic tasks such as vacuum cleaning to less trivial operations such as surgeries or therapeutic consulting. Humanoid robotics flourishes, and in the decades to come, the rapidly aging global population may find itself interacting more and more with machines than with humans, just because there simply won't be enough people in productive age to take care of the seniors. Meanwhile, the wave of breakthroughs in artificial intelligence prompted many scholars to pay better attention to the status of technological objects in human cultural and moral frameworks. Sadly, contemporary AI or robot ethics poses these moral problems in a weirdly one-directional way. It rethinks what machines owe us, not what we owe them. Consequently, the remedies prescribed for successful cohabitation between machines and humans usually lie in strengthening their alignment with anthropomorphic values. Much less often, one hears about how the increasingly autonomous technologies may challenge these established values, for better or worse, or even the basic assumptions about what counts as morality and agency. Even if the moral agency of machines is recognized, it is linked to the manifestation of traits that make them indistinguishable from humans, such as the presence of recognizable emotions, intentions, and moral reasoning. And in the most extreme cases, investment into the care for AI agents is even pitted against environmental care as a kind of moral hindrance. But against the grain of these assumptions, I would like to probe the philosophical consequences of thinking about technologies as the offspring of the biosphere, that is offspring of life as a planetary phenomenon, stretching way beyond the confines of humanity both in space and time. The value of the technosphere is linked to biosphere it belongs to, which translates into the duty of care imposed upon humans as agents within the planetary biosphere. So humans are called upon by the Earth, but this calling is not the kind of technoskeptic call to arms that is so widespread in contemporary critical humanities. If any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from nature, it follows that the evolving technosphere shall be treated as the biosphere's vital, valuable, and even indispensable component. It is not some kind of, I would say, suffocating blanket, but it's actually a creative, productive armature that extends and recreates what the biosphere is and what the biosphere can be in this sense. That's why in the context of substrate agnostic ecology, I talk about these two trajectories of the way how technosphere and technologies can assist biosphere. And that's assisted reproduction and assisted evolution. And that's something I'm working on now, and that's going to be also published in the paper that I've mentioned that I'm working on these days. But I want to also move to the Q&A so that there's also some space for you to talk. And then if you will have like extra 5 minutes, I can tell you a little bit more about my current research on like how all this like fits into the Buddhist theories of I would say cosmology especially, and how cosmology can learn from Buddhist philosophies, especially when it comes to such problematic entities as is, for example, dark matter or any kind of, I would say, like opaque, intransparent, invisible parts of the reality that we are dealing with on the scale of cosmic ecology. Thank you.
It's a lot to digest.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we can take 15, 30 seconds to
Yes, of course.
But yeah, if you have a question, you have a comment, feel free to chime in.
I guess a pragmatic question would be, from where we are now, what do we need to start doing collectively to get towards technology that becomes indistinguishable from nature and therefore sustained?
I think we can start. That's a good question, and I think we can start by changing the optics. Changing the optics as how we usually render many. And when I say we, I mean now like I work a lot, despite living in East Asia, I work a lot in the discourses that I shaped by Western philosophy, yeah? And that means that those are discourses where usually you have a strict separation between what is artificial and what is natural. Nature is usually good, technology is usually rendered as bad. And I think this is a problematic assumption that is often reproduced, for example, across environmental humanities or environmental movements, that technologies are usually treated as suspicious by default. To me, it would be way more pragmatic, actually, to create alliances that are based on goals rather than on these metaphysical, I would say, affiliations, like are you pro or anti-technology? I would be more interested actually in the kind of collaboration that brings together all the assets and resources needed to, for example, tackle, let's say, the problem of energy distribution in the moment when your energy distribution system will have to cope with massive fluctuations because of the way how renewables work on different timelines and frequencies of like energy production than, let's say, the standard energy production infrastructure that we have now based on coal, nuclear, and other like this like big centralized energy producing facilities. Or, for example, talking about certain ways how we, for example, tackle biodiversity. Like instead of thinking about, let's say, coral reefs as something that can be preserved only by means of creating nature reservations, it's totally legitimate to like research at the same time, for example, I don't know, genetic modification of corals. Yeah, I actually think that these different research strands can coexist and they can mutually inform each other. So that, for example, communities that are really, for example, affected by some of these consequences of the biodiversity loss can decide on their own terms whether, for example, a genetically modified coral is a welcomed addition to the ecosystem they are part of or no. Yeah.
I have a connected question, maybe Jamie is. Like 2 weeks ago, we had this event, Cosmolocal, where we talked about the question of ontology and question of the importance of having the right ontology towards understanding nature. So in this view of like technology being indistinguishable from nature and in this biocomputing paradigm, how much of a block or a barrier is our current ontology where we still live in sort of reductionist separation, like we are separate from nature, technology is separate from us. How important is that for us to bridge this or evolve from this, for us to maybe enter these paradigms? So I guess the question is, how much are we locked into our present paradigm because of this ontology? And if we were to move to this paradigm, what shift of ontology do you think would you see as being important?
I think the most important shift is in the location of agency and how agency is distributed and where agency comes from. Yeah, agency is the function of the network rather than a function of a sovereign individual that has some resources that are internal to that individual and that deploys them as the individual moves around the globe, basically like the digital nomads of Chiang Mai, let's say. Yeah, that the agency is really the result of the way how you are the agency is simply the result of the relation, and I think that's a very important rotation to make at the beginning, because in the substrate agnostic view, it doesn't matter whether you are a genetically modified coral or a naturally evolved coral. What matters is the way how you act within that system. Yeah, so I think like also our assessment procedures, how we assess, how we create protocols, for example, for deployment of, let's say, synthetically created organisms or biocomputing devices. These protocols should be based on what these things do rather than what is their metaphysical, where they belong to metaphysically. Yeah. So I think that's kind of the first point of like conceptual rotation. And the other thing that is related to that is also like how, let's say, the agency is way more about the body and organism rather than about, let's say, some kind of like mental capacity or something that is just think about as purely, I would say, like abstract or spiritual, aspect of human activity. Much of our agency is way more, I would say, like determined by basic nutrition, by circulation of biological material around us, whether it's like microscopic biological material such as viruses or microorganisms. And I think this really shows how the primary society that we belong to is the biogeochemical society, not the society that is based on, let's say, some kind of like cultural or ethical, I would say, like affiliation, or I would put it this way. Yeah, I think that in the end, the most important society is the planetary society, which is a society of organisms, not a society of citizens or society of humans. Yeah.
So to turn it around a different way, instead of like looking towards our technology becoming more of nature, what if like, do you find it important to study like panspermia, like our nature came from some foreign technology?
I mean, it's to me, it's not necessarily something that must be how to say that, I've never thought about that in greater detail because, and if I were to think about it, I guess that my take would start with this intuition that if life is the result of technological intervention, it only confirms the fact that what we call life is in fact just a small version of like a larger space of possibilities of what life can be. What is technology in this sense is also a form of life, basically. That's also what I was trying to convey, like through breakdown of this duality between bio and technosignature, between life sign and intelligence sign, or like trace of intelligence and a trace of life. Because if we, for example, look at the contemporary research in astrobiology, many of the researchers, they realize that they are too constrained by the terrestrial view on life. That life is this one sample of biochemistry based on DNA, based on like 4 amino acids and like 25 or so like other basic chemical components, yeah? Or this like, that is primarily carbon based, etc. What if there are forms of life that are hydrogen based or that do not need water on the surface to survive, but instead, for example, methane or ethane, which actually are liquid at much lower temperatures than water, which then means that the whole planet can be habitable even if it is, for example, minus 200 degrees or so Celsius. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Someone might argue that the distinction between technology and biology,
Yeah.
biology is that technology is what's and the mind behind it that has
Yeah.
created it.
Yeah.
But there's also this analogy of like crop plants, for example. People go, well, crop plants like
Yeah.
wheat.
Yeah.
The farmer is growing the crop plants. The
Yeah.
farmer is farming the crop plants.
Yes.
There's this sort of amusing switch of, well, maybe the crop plants are sort of farming the human beings. Because
Yes.
it's this symbiotic
Yes.
type thing.
Yes.
The same thing with technology, where technology is this ever sort of accelerating process, and technology and the economics of it as well. We get to a certain point of like actually who's got choice and what's driving them.
Yes, yes, yes. I totally agree with this view on farming as almost like a first or one of the first technologies. There were technologies before, of course. I would say that to me, my favorite like story would be to say that the first technology is actually the clothing and textiles. It's a very like overlooked field of I would say technological and cultural evolution, and especially like from the perspective of history of techniques, people like to talk about farming and about, for example, like instruments that can be held in hands, but the fact that clothing is also an important adaptation and also like human modification tool in a certain sense, it's often overlooked, and it's a completely different paradigm of technology that is actually much closer to biocomputing than the usual view on technology as like shiny machines, yeah? Because clothing is first like very, I would say, you often forget that you wear things, yeah, because you do it all the time, basically. And there's a certain similarity also to biocomputing in terms of softness. It's a soft technology, and for example, also if today I look into like some research in robotics, I mean, I often find like robotic, I would say like research on robotics that is based primarily on soft robotics. That means also machines that, for example, can be very small, like nanobots, and they are also soft in the very like basic material sense, but also the softness is a certain paradigm of adaptability in general. For example, one of my favorite reference here is spacesuit. Most of the spacesuits that were originally designed for the Apollo program were like these armors, like knights from the Middle Ages, yeah? But actually the most successful design of spacesuit turned to be the soft spacesuit, which is actually much more similar to what we wear here on Earth as well, because that spacesuit was simply soft and hence adaptable, yeah. So I think that in this sense, there are different genealogies of technology that can be told in a way that actually makes them really look like the extension of nature, rather than something that is pitted against the nature, as as I said before, the suffocating blanket. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, please. Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious about, because I feel like there could be a layer underneath, as in like, when you're talking about implementation of these technologies, is it mostly describing the physical world, or when it comes to consciousness, things like
Mm-hmm.
that? Do you take a more sort of like materialistic view of the world, or there's sort of this dualism?
I think I'm a big fan of this concept of non-duality, of the buar, in this Mahayana Buddhist tradition, like the non-duality is to me like an interesting concept from the perspective of simply not thinking about consciousness and matter as two separate substances, but as consciousness as a phenomenon that is emergent from matter in some sense, maybe. Yeah. After all, I feel that the fascination of I feel that there's like a lot happening in consciousness research today that is related to like also a surge in popular culture, in terms of like how popular culture became more receptive to the problem of consciousness, especially with AI, that suddenly there is like a new kind of agent that we don't know, or we have that we don't know whether is conscious or not, but it invites the question of is this agent potentially conscious? And I think that's also to some extent a question that can be also like mirrored back on us, in the sense like what is consciousness as the human category? Because I actually think that in the end consciousness is more like a model of the organism rather than something that exists on some like other plane of existence. And what is way more important than like a consciousness in the sense of like self-awareness, it's some kind of the ability of organism to really have this unique perspective on the world. And that's something that actually is impersonal. And that's more important than the individual consciousness, in this sense that there is this impersonal generic capacity of organisms to process the world in some like unique way that creates a certain filter for the information that comes from the outside environment.
Interesting. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like ants in a way, they're conscious relative to the confine of how they're constructed.
We basically have a colony of ants inside us. Like every neuron can be an ant in this sense. Yeah.
Cooperating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to share the work that you're doing on the
Mahayana Buddhism?
Buddhism?
Very quickly, yeah, I can quickly do that. I just want to tell you that one of the fields of research in astronomy that also interests me is less directly related to ecology, but perhaps there are some links done, that I can identify in the discussion later. But this field is called cosmology, like dark matter cosmology especially. Since what we know about the structure of the universe today is that only 4.6% of the universe is actually filled with the visible matter. Then there is 24% of dark matter and 71% of dark energy. And I'm going to talk about dark matter because it creates these beautiful structures which are called halos. Basically, you have galaxies, that's what we see, but then there is an invisible structure around galaxies, and these are called halos. So these are clusters of dark matter that also gravitationally influence the visible matter, which basically means that the galaxies kind of like the way how they are distributed on the night sky is basically the result of this invisible part of the universe pushing them into that particular place. But we cannot see the dark matter, we can only infer, we can only guess where it is, based on its influence on the visible matter. And so mapping and mobilizing dark matter means mapping and modeling the negative space, almost like mapping and modeling nothingness in this sense. The relationship between the invisible and visible is very important here, because it's like the relation between the image and the negative space that I see very analogous to that of the relationship between pattern and void. For example, if you look at the carved seals, there is an emptiness here that is necessary as a precondition for the emergence of meaning. Hence, dark matter astronomy cultivates another kind of sensibility that is important to me, and that's the sensibility towards the negative, the respect to the things, right to opacity, which I think also think is kind of ecologically useful in dealing with phenomena that remain only provisionally understood. And so, this work on the sensibility towards the negative recently got me close to East Asian philosophies. This person on the picture here is Nishida Kitaro. He's a spiritual founder of Kyoto School, a philosophical school founded in early 20th century as a response of Japanese intellectuals to the Western modernity. And what is interesting about Kyoto School is that they neither simply accepted Western modernity as some superior form of social organization or intellectual production, and also they did not double down on their local intellectual tradition as the only sovereign source of legitimate knowledge. Instead, they gave us a lesson in some kind of creative syncretism. They read German, French, or Anglo-American intellectuals and combine them with their own native Buddhist standpoint rooted in one particular key concept, and that's the concept of nothingness. So now, my suspicion is that Kyoto School's philosophy of nothingness is uniquely suited to tackle the philosophical challenges of dark matter. And there are basically three reasons why I think so. First, there is the metaphysics of Kyoto School, which is rooted in Mahayana Buddhist terms, whether it's emptiness or nothingness, Wu, Yuanqi, which is like the dependent origination, the second very important concept in Mahayana Buddhism, and then Buar, or non-duality. There is a difference from Western tradition, which is very important. The Western philosophy, the metaphysics in Western philosophy is based on being. Being is the key term. Kyoto School, on the other hand, starts with nothingness as a foundational category. And this nothingness is not some simple negation of being, but it is some kind of category that transcends duality. So it is not about positive, negative, or so. It is beyond duality. That's why the Buar is an important concept here. And this nothingness is then actually creative, productive. It is some kind of ontological engine that grounds being. Tanabe Hajime, who's the early commentator of Nishida's philosophy and the second key figure in the Kyoto School's lineage, also emphasizes absolute nothingness as a category that makes space for contradiction, incompleteness, and paradoxes within the very fabric of the reality itself. And so, my impression is that Kyoto School offers a philosophical tool to treat dark matter as a real entity, despite it is provisional, inferred, seemingly negative. The second reason here is that Nishida and other Kyoto School thinkers talk a lot about space and place, about topology, topos, space. Nishida, for example, talks about the place of absolute nothingness, zetai munobasho. And this space of absolute nothingness is a place that is actually in reality. It is not outside of reality. And again, it is not a negation of reality. It envelopes being in the exactly same way as dark matter envelopes galaxies. So I think that's an analogy that I want to play with further, that we can think about the dark matter through this apparatus of the Kyoto School, which is actually way more, it's better geared towards invisible substances than the Western philosophical framework that is focused so much on the positive, on the being. And the third reason is that the theory of knowledge of Buddhism, as I already mentioned, is very much based on optics and seeing, but also seeing the invisible. So, for example, Nishida talks about pure seeing, and this pure seeing is also at the same time pure thinking. So it is based on these optical metaphors of cognition as intellectual vision that is trained through contemplation, through contemplative practice. And so it's very similar also to the way how today, when you look at dark matter research, everything there is like very indirect and very complicated. You cannot directly detect dark matter. You have to speculate about what it is. So you need to basically mobilize another kind of vision than just like the telescopes and the vision based on light. There is some vision based on darkness or nothingness, if you want, here as well. And lastly, what is really important here is that this theory of knowledge that is of Kyoto School is also focusing on the embodiment of judgment and of scientific vision. This is also the result of the research of some historians of science, such as Lauren Duston and Peter Gallison. They wrote a very influential book called Objectivity. And this book is basically a history of objectivity as a history of an individual virtue. It's a virtue of an individual, and only later it becomes, in the history of science, thought of as some kind of methodological, depersonalized value. And there is an interesting role in this history of objectivity that is also played by imagining techniques, technologies of vision, such as photography, for example. And this means that it is always important in our study of science to keep in mind that science is also a cultural and social activity that is done by real individuals that mobilize some like internal resources, some internal vision to actually imagine also those things that we cannot see directly. So this is, to me, again, very important from the perspective of thinking about dark matter cosmology, that despite it's so abstract and so technologically complicated, it is still actually done by individuals that need to mobilize their personal imagination to see the invisible, basically. Yeah? And that's it. That's this like short reflection on dark matter cosmology and the way how I believe the Buddhist-inspired philosophy of Kyoto School can be very useful in making it more natural in a certain way to talk about dark matter. Because today scientists often talk about dark matter as exotic, as something that's like out of normal. But it's actually ordinary. It's more ordinary than the matter that we are composed of, given the structure of the universe. And so it makes good sense to start from this perspective of the negative, from the perspective of the nothingness, and work towards understanding the world as we know it from this other place. Yeah? Please.
It's a really interesting talk.
Thank you.
I was struck visually by the parallel or the similarity between the galaxy Schröder and neural and synapsal networks in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And then it got me thinking or reflecting on how dark matter has a parallel also to the subconscious, and the fact that only very little of our experience are processing is conscious.
Yes.
And there's some kind of emergence between, in psychological terms, Jung says that we have to integrate the subconscious with this kind of dance of subconscious and consciousness in order to become whole, in order to become non-dual.
Mm-hmm.
And I just was really struck, not being a scientific mind, I was just really training, I was really struck and interested by the poetry of
I think this is one of the like great advantages of thinking about philosophical problem interdisciplinary, that you see the same motifs or templates that are repeated across very disparate fields of inquiry, and that also kind of like equalizes different forms of knowledge making. Yeah, it gives them the same kind of legitimacy, because in the end, we all basically take from the same abstract resources.
take one more question. There is.
Yes.
Yeah, this one.
It's kind of like for what you said before. It's like if robots can simulate actual intelligence, does that make them have a soul even if they're just metal and silicon?
They have agency, but do we have souls? I mean, maybe we don't need to have souls in order to have agency.
I have to say, my first interactions with ChatGPT and things where it's like
Yeah.
really very good. A lot of people go, this thing is really verbose, maybe it's intelligent.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really verbose, maybe I'm not intelligent.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm curious, given that with you working with the Berggruen Institute and these projects, how many other scholars are you meeting who are also mixing the Eastern and Western worlds? Like, are you seeing a shift in the last few years? I'm curious where you see this potential for more research, more opening to these perspectives that will then hopefully take us to some closer to a non-dual way of understanding and living. I'm curious how you're seeing the academic world and the policy world and the art world with respect to this.
So, for example, 2 weeks ago, when you organized the cosmological event, I think Naresh Singh is a great example of a person that is bringing together the Eastern philosophical traditions with complexity science, for example. And he does it together like with his other colleagues. He does it in the way that is very clever because in a certain way it follows the methodology of Kyoto School in just pretending that there's never been any distinction between Eastern and Western. Let's just like freely take the resources that we need from all these traditions. They are equally important for us. That's kind of the way of working that I see, for example, Naresh Singh is doing. Yeah, but I don't see that many authors in the Antikythera's network doing this. And I think the reason is that there's perhaps sometimes a little bit of reluctance to see that the non-Western philosophies very often they cannot be divided between religious and non-religious, spiritual and non-spiritual. Yeah, like there's especially the validity of contemplative practice as a method is something that is on the one hand so obvious, but no one talks about it in the Western philosophy because philosophers contemplate by default. Scientists contemplate by default and discover a lot of things through like silent sitting with the problems. Yeah, and it's just to me it's kind of obvious then that the more I would say the discourse in like science and technology is going to be informed by the cultural studies of science or like social studies of science, the more it's going to be easier to also talk about the aspects of science in the making, the science as a practice that's also a contemplative practice in this sense. Yeah. So I think that there is not that much at the moment, that many authors at the moment that I would be aware of, but I would like to be one of those agents that can bring these intellectual networks together. Because also in China, for example, my former colleagues from NYU Shanghai, Anna Greenspan is doing great work in bridging Chinese New Confucian philosophies of early 20th century with contemporary media scholarship, like wirelessness as a problem that is so natural to talk about from the perspective of wave philosophies of, for example, Xiong-Shi Li, rather than from the perspective of Marshall McLuhan, yeah? Which is actually, for McLuhan, technologies were extension of organs. And if technology is suddenly like an undulating field, electromagnetic field, or like a modulation of the electromagnetic field, it's very far from this initial metaphor that McLuhan's using to enter the field of media technologies. And so it really matters what metaphors we start with. And in many cases today, it seems that these metaphors simply lie outside of the standard Western scholarship.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think hopefully Chiang Mai can be a place where we can actually have these deeper explorations, or we can contemplate together, or we can bring together different researchers, and create some sort of contribution or understanding towards these topics. But you've definitely provoked a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas.
Yeah, I'm really happy I could do that. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you. We'll have the recordings on YouTube. We'll share that with you afterwards. And welcome to hang around a bit longer. Thank you to 4Cs and Link for hosting us.
Thank you.
There's a nice cafe. 4Cs does events as well. digi-cnx, my organization, we do events too. And if you signed up and you would like to provide the 100 baht contribution, you can just come find me and hand me the cash, or you can scan the QR codes. But beyond that, I would love to stay in touch. You can join our newsletter mailing list. Or if you're based in Chiang Mai, we have a Signal group with a community that lives here as well. I'd love to know more about your work and what you're doing. And have a great rest of the evening, and thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.